Um, Welcome to this session. We want to know the type of variables that we can have in social science or studies. We already saw the definition of variable and how we can measure a variable and the type of data we can generate. So let's commit this time to look at the types of variables that we have based on the role that they play in research. The first variable that we will talk about is the dependent variable. The dependent variable is any variables whose changes are dependent on changes in another variable. In other words, the behavior of a dependent variable is caused by changes in another variable called the independent variable. An independent variable is any variable that causes a change in other variable or determines the behavior of the dependent variable. So I've listed some examples here. Let's try to use these examples and see if which of them is the dependent and the independent variable. If you look at the income and lifestyle of people, we can see that your income level will determine the type of lifestyle that you put up. And therefore, income becomes the independent variable because it causes changes, can influence changes in lifestyle. When your income is low, how do you behave? What are the things do you spend on and the rest? And if your income is high, how do you also live your life? So you see that the lifestyle we live is influenced by the income that we have. We also have age and the speed in running. Uh, at certain time in a man's life, you will see that your ability to run is strongly dependent on your age. So if we have a young, vibrant man and we have an old lady and we put them there and we say that they should run, you will see that the young man can run faster than the old woman. That means that the age that somebody has implication about the speed. So age becomes the independent variable that determines the speed that people can run. Or yeah, so that is it. So we have some examples there. Look at them and see the ones that you can rank them or can read them as dependent and then independent variable. We also have the third category of the variable called the intervening variable. And the intervening variable is any variable that has bearing on the relationship that exists between the dependent variable and the independent variable. So there are three types of intervening variables that we will consider in this context. The first intervening variable is what we call the controlled variable. The second one is the moderating variable, and the third is the mediating variable. So let's look at what we mean by controlled variable. Under certain circumstances, the true nature of relationship that exists between certain variables may not be known if we don't factor in other variables. So, for instance, let's make an example in this class. Um, Assuming that we all want to look at the how we are able to uh, learn statistics through this course and how it also affects our fear of statistics. So our learning of statistics becomes our independent variable, and our fear of statistics becomes our dependent variable. But if we don't look at the background of each of us, we may not see the true meaning of the relationship that exists between our learning of statistics and that of the fear of statistics. For instance, if some of us have background in statistics, some of us have background in material science, mathematics, whilst others have, say, home economics or social science, business, arts. We see that those with strong mathematical background will be able to appreciate this course better than those who don't have this kind of background. And therefore, in assessing how the course influences our fear of statistics, we have to control for the level of our background in terms of education of the participants. So we will do what we call controlled analysis through what we call the hierarchical multiple regression. That is, if we are using SPSS as the main statistical software for the analysis of search and objective. So here we will look at how the field of statistics behave with the inclusion of the background of the participants alongside the learning of the software, the learning of the course, that is the statistics, and then we see how it influences. And the second instance is that we can look at it when it is not, when the background is not included, how does the behavior of the um, field of statistics shows. Okay, so that is how we can look at for the controlled variable given the role that it plays in the research. The next one is a moderating variable. A moderating variable is any variable that has impact on the bearing of the relationship that exists between the dependent variable and the independent variable. Moderators normally do not have any relationship as founded by theory with the dependent variable and the independent variable. Their main focus is on the nature of relationship that exists between the dependent variable and the independent variable. So they have bearing on such a relationship, and therefore let's look at the type of bearing that they have on the relationship that exists between the dependent and the independent. One, they have bearing on the direction of the relationship. In other words, if we have positive relationship between two variables, the inclusion of the moderating variable can cause that relationship to become negative. And if it is positive too, it can also turn it into negative. Or if it is negative, the inclusion can turn it into positive. So that is how moderating variable affect the direction. The second aspect is that moderating variable has the tendency to affect the strength of relationship that exists between the independent variable and the dependent variable. And therefore, if the relationship is uh, weak, it can make it moderate. If it is strong, it can make it weak. So that is how moderating variables play their role in the context of research. The next variable is what we call the mediating variable. And this mediating variable is any variable that helps to better explain the impact of the changes in the independent variable on the dependent variable. In other words, they have transmittive ability to be able to change the behavior of the relationship that exists between the dependent variable and the independent variable. So let's see, for instance, if we think that leadership has compensation have has impact on the level of motivation that people exhibit, and we think that although that impact is there, all right, but it can be influenced if we have good leadership. Then leadership comes in to transfer or to be able to influence the impact of um, the compensation in a positive manner, to be able to help us to enhance or increase the level of motivation that the people exhibit at the workplace. So these are the type of variables that we can consider in a typical social science research. One, we have the dependent variable, we have the dependent variable, and then we have the intervening variables. And these intervening variables could be controlled variable, moderating variable, or a mediating variable. So let's look at conceptual framework. Conceptual framework works a lot in most social science studies because it is a means by which we are able to present a pictorial view about the purported relationship that exists or that should exist between the variables or the constructs that we are considering in the context of the study. And just as we saw the type of roles that the various variables or constructs may play in a research, we can equally illustrate this type of roles or that of relationship that exists among or between the variables with the use of conceptual framework. So let's look at how we can illustrate this on a conceptual framework. So if you look at this conceptual framework, we have a compensation. It is believed that compensation can have influence on the motivation. The line or the arrow is pointing on motivation, which means that no arrow is pointing at compensation, and therefore compensation can easily be classified as the independent variable, whilst motivation can be classified as the dependent variable. Dependent variable in most instances can have more than one arrow pointing at them, but independent variable usually has no arrow pointing at them at all. Now you can have a gender as playing a moderating role. Just as we saw that moderators have impact on the relationship that exists between the dependent variable and the independent variable. And if you observe the arrow carefully, it is pointing at the relationship, the arrow that moves from the compensation to the motivation. That tells us that gender is now playing moderating role. And whenever we do moderating analysis or moderation analysis, it is also important that we also conduct tests of difference, especially if you're able to establish that there's an interaction in there. Then we have to be able to do some test of difference to see where lies the difference. This will be reserved for further interrogation in other videos that will be posted. Then we also have leadership. Here, leadership is considered as playing a mediating role because it is believed that although compensation can influence the level of motivation, it can be enhanced. This effect can be enhanced if we have committed leadership in place, and therefore we say that leadership is transferring or helping to transfer the impact of compensation on the level of motivation. And we also have workplace policy as a controlled variable, maybe in the context of the study. If we don't look at how the policy regulates their behavior, we may see that maybe it's compensation that is influencing their motivation and that of leadership. But if you control for the type of policy that exists, then we will be able to know it. Usually, controlled variables have link with the dependent variable because it is the behavior of the dependent variable that will help us to know whether the controlled variable is indeed a factor to be considered in the context of the study. That's why you see the arrow pointing at the dependent variable. It has no relationship whatsoever with the independent variable or the moderating variable or the mediating variable. Let's look at the three critical roles of conceptual framework. One, conceptual framework helps to indicate the flow of literature review and the choice of the theoretical framework. So every research that you want to do, we have an imaginary type of relationship that you expect to exist among or between the variables of interest in the research. And this can be illustrated in the conceptual framework. And that one dictates how your literature review should be structured, especially when it comes to the formulation of hypotheses and the choice of theoretical support or theoretical review that you must done to be able to support the type of relationship that you are trying to establish in your conceptual framework. Usually, conceptual framework also work in studies that uses explanatory or causal research designs, unlike the case of descriptive and exploratory research designs. So it's very, very important for those of us who do research with explanatory research design. Mostly, you will have to establish conceptual framework that details the relationship that exists between or among the construct or the variables of interest in your study. The next rule is that conceptual framework helps in the formulating of the research objectives or the hypothesis because conceptual framework is able to demonstrate the various roles that they are playing. We are able to establish the objectives. For instance, if we go back, we can see that we can say we want to look out for the effect of compensation on motivation. We want to look at the mediating role of leadership in the relationship between compensation and motivation, or we want to look at the moderating role of gender in the relationship between compensation and that of motivation. And then we also look at the after workplace policy has been controlled for, how does work motivation, employee motivation behave in the presence of compensation. So we see that the type of objective that we set is strongly influenced by the conceptual framework that we develop. The last but not the least is that it influences the choice of analytical techniques. As you can see, based on how the conceptual framework has been represented, we should be able to know the type of statistical tools that can be used to analyze the data that we have collected to be able to achieve the objective enshrined in the research. Now let's look at the types of data. Once we have seen the various type of variables based on the role that they play and how we can illustrate them on conceptual framework. The types of data, we can classify them based on how data are captured, how data are captured. That's the first dimension. We can look at how data are captured. And then we can also look at how software sees the data for data analysis, how they see data for statistical analysis. From the point of statistical software and techniques, we can have some classifications. And then the last one, how the statistical data type that we can have in research, especially with respect to the, the, the time of the collection of such data. So let's quickly look at the types of data. The first one that we know, when we talk about how data are captured, we can have numeric data, textual data, and virtual or image data. So when we talk about numeric data, they are about data that are measured or expressed in numbers. And therefore numeric data help in quantitative studies, and that is the focus of this video, because most of the analysis that we do are expressed as quantitative data. So if you look at the age, the income, height, temperature, pressure, profit, time value of money, stock prices, all these things can be expressed, all these variables can be expressed in numbers, and therefore they will produce what we call numeric data for analysis. Then we also have textual data. Textual data are data that are captured using symbols or using words or letters. So they normally go with studies that use interview situations whereby we cannot use numbers to capture them, especially if the objects of study are unique and they are more abstract in nature. We cannot use numbers to capture them. Then we use textual data. For instance, if you are studying about causes of teenage pregnancy, and I think that each individual victim will have different situation, and therefore if you use numbers to represent or measure such a situation, it will not give a vivid picture of it. So they have to narrate how their cases occurred, and then you should be able to capture it in a nice way through their tests to be able to produce textual data for further analysis. And therefore, textual data are more used in qualitative studies and exploratory research designs. Yeah, normally that is where textual data are used. Then we also have what we call the virtual data. For virtual data, we are talking about data that are produced in imagery form. Okay, so such data are much complicated and complex and go beyond the scope for analysis. Normally, they are used by huge data science. They are used for huge data sciences to be able to detect variations, to be able to spot trends and all those things. So this, for the purposes of how data are captured, at least we have these three types to consider. Then we also have so example of virtual data could be traffic flow. Okay, we can observe the distribution of data about traffic flow and to be able to see how things went on. So that is a typical example. The next thing we can also see is how data is seen from the perspective of statistical softwares and from the perspective of statistical analysis. If you look at that context, data can be classified as a discrete or categorical data. So discrete, it could be discrete or categorical data. And this discrete or categorical data are data that are captured at the nominal and at the ordinal level. I hope you have not forgotten. For instance, gender. In the context of Ghana, gender, we have male and female. So, or if you want to look at religious affiliation, somebody can be a Muslim, somebody can be a Christian, somebody can be a traditionalist, Hinduist, and the rest. Or uh, in terms of ordinal scale of measurement, we can have classification of development of countries, maybe underdeveloped country, developed country, developing country, advanced country, and the rest. They are all going to produce what we call we're going to produce discrete data, and that is how the software or the computer will see them. Then we also have continuous data. Continuous data are for variables that are measured at the interval and the ratio or scale level. So age as a continuous variable can produce a continuous data. Income can produce a continuous data. Um, Amount of rainfall over a given period of time can provide continuous data. Uh, and the rest, you see, more examples can be found in the earlier presentation. So you can go there and then check on that. Then the third classification is the statistical data types. Normally that talks about how uh, data are collected and how they are analyzed. Okay, so from that perspective, we have three main types of data. The first one is what we call cross-sectional data or cross-section data. And cross-section data is data that is collected about some variables uh, at a time, at a single point in time. And that one is also characterized by the individual units. By individual units, we have to know the unit of analysis in terms of whether we are doing it at the people level, at the company level, or at the country level. And therefore, once we collect the data, once we use it for the purposes to which we collected them. In most instances, most studies in social sciences, in our context, if you want to write your thesis or dissertation, I don't think that you have time to collect data on time series unless you are using secondary data. But for those who use primary data, you are most likely to uh, use cross-sectional research design in collecting your data, and that will help you to achieve your objective. So we have more examples like student grades at the end of the current semester. For instance, this semester, the grades that students have, we can have scores for it and only give the picture to the current situation. Okay, so that is what we call the cross-sectional data. And the cross-sectional data also, in cross-sectional data, you have to understand that the ordering of data does not matter. The ordering, how the data is arranged in order doesn't matter. In other words, we can order the data by ascending, descending, or even randomized order, and this will not affect or will have no effect on the modeling results that we have in our research. We also have the time series data, and time series data talks about data that are collected at a specific point in time over a given period. This is very, very important. We can, for instance, we can look at the stock prices of a particular company or for a particular commodity in the stock market over a given period of time. And therefore, it is important that we look at for the, 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 the many type of frequencies that the observation of the changes in price occurred. So if you want to look at the hourly changes in price for that period, then we have to examine it in an hourly sense. And if you want to look at daily, or weekly, monthly, or quarterly, or even annually, then we should be able to observe them at different frequencies. Unlike the cross-sectional where the ordering is not important, ordering is paramount when it comes to time series of data. So if the time series of the time series data about maybe cocoa production in Ghana from 1999 to 2019, that is what we are dealing with, and you go and change the 1999 and go and take 1996 as a year production and bring it, it will not fit. So it is very, very important that we order the point, the data point in a chronological manner, Very, very important. So you say that each point represents the values at a specific point in time. As such, time series data are typically presented in a chronological manner. Very, very important. This one, let's look at that. So when you say something is being measured or represented as a chronology, it simply means that in order of sequence, either from uh, descendant or ascendant order. Very, very important. Then the last one that we have to look out for is the panel data. Panel data exhibit the character of both cross-sectional and longitudinal, cross-sectional and the time series data. In other words, we can have different types of variables studied at different time period over a given period of time. So panel data is data that contains observation about different cross sections across time, just as I just mentioned earlier on. And cross-sectional, panel data and longitudinal data are more complex when you compare them with that of the cross-sectional and the time series of data. So like time series data, panel data contain observation collected at regular frequency and they are ordered in a chronological manner. So we can look at economic panel data, example like GDP across multiple countries. Okay, so if you want to look at GDP across different countries, if you look at GDP for Ghana over a period of time, that becomes the cross-sectional. But if you are looking at comparing the GDP of Ghana to Benin, to Togo, to Nigeria, to the US, to China, and over a given period of time, then we are using what we call panel data. Normally, panel data are obtained from historical or past or secondary data. So that is that. So thank you for your time, and I wish you all the best. So let's recap what we have done so far. We have looked at the type of variables that we have based on the role that they play, and we have illustrated them on conceptual framework for our understanding, and we have also looked at for the type of data that we can work with when we want to do analysis in social science, be it the type of data as measured by how it is captured or how it is analyzed or how it is seen by the software for data processing. Thank you.